She didn't remember the exact moment it began, only that one day, blame became her language. It slipped into every thought, every breath, every prayer. She could smile, she could serve, she could forgive others, but she could never forgive herself. And the cruelest part was that no one even asked her to. She built that prison alone. It started with one mistake, a word, a choice, a silence that cost her something she loved. And instead of healing, she replayed it, over and over, as if she could somehow change the ending by reliving the pain. She became her own accuser. Every good thing that tried to reach her heart was intercepted by guilt. Every time someone said, "You've grown so much," a quiet voice whispered, "If only they knew." She thought shame would keep her humble, that guilt would make her faithful, that if she punished herself long enough, maybe she'd finally feel forgiven. But that's not how grace works. Grace doesn't build cages, it opens doors. And the only thing her blame ever did was convince her she wasn't worthy of walking through them. There were nights she'd cry without understanding why. Nights when she'd remember every wrong word, every missed moment, every chance she thought she ruined. She carried apologies no one would ever hear, and questions no one could answer. And in that quiet torment, she began to believe that maybe God was disappointed too. But he wasn't. He never was. Because while she was busy keeping score, he had already written mercy over every line. He didn't see a failure when he looked at her. He saw his daughter, still trying, still showing up, still covered in grace she hadn't learned to accept yet. One morning, after another sleepless night, she stood in front of the mirror. Puffy eyes, tired hands, trembling breath. And she said out loud, "I'm sorry." Not to anyone else this time, to herself. The sound of it broke something open. For the first time, she realized how cruel she had been to her own soul. How she had been holding herself to a standard God never demanded. How she had spent years trying to earn what was already hers. Forgiveness. And right there, in the silence, in the exhaustion, in the unremarkable moment that no one else saw, she stopped. She stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped rehearsing the same story that always ended with her as the villain. For the first time, she didn't try to fix it. She just let the weight fall. The tears came slowly, but they didn't burn like before. They felt cleansing, like mercy had been waiting behind them all along. And she knew then that healing wasn't about forgetting what happened. It was about finally believing she wasn't beyond repair. That day, she didn't become perfect. She just became honest. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Honesty with God. Honesty with yourself, and the courage to believe that love is still meant for you, even here. So if you've ever carried a guilt that feels too heavy to speak aloud, if you've spent years punishing yourself for what you can't undo, this is for you. Because there's a day coming, a quiet, holy day, when you'll finally stop blaming yourself too. And when you do, you'll feel it, that still, sacred peace that says, "It's over now. You're free." And if these words touch something you've kept hidden, if you've longed to stop reliving what grace already buried, stay with me. This space, this story, this channel is for women like you. The ones still learning that mercy doesn't wait at the end of the journey. It walks with you through every step. Subscribe, not for answers, but for reminders like this, that God's love is not afraid of your past, that you were never meant to be your own judge, and that grace has already whispered your verdict. Forgiven. Guilt has a way of disguising itself as responsibility. At first it feels noble, like you're holding yourself accountable, like you're keeping your heart pure. But slowly, quietly, it turns into chains. and she wore those chains for so long that she forgot what freedom felt like. Every time something went wrong, she blamed herself. If a relationship ended, it was her fault. If someone was hurt, she should have seen it coming. If a dream died, she must have done something wrong. Guilt became her reflex, the voice she trusted more than grace. It told her she deserved to feel heavy, that she was safer punishing herself than risking love again. And so she learned to live with that weight, smiling through it, praying through it, carrying it even when her hands shook. She convinced herself it was humility, but really, it was fear. Fear of being loved again. Fear of being seen as more than her mistakes. She'd wake up some mornings already tired. Her first thought, not a prayer, but a sentence. It's my fault. Even when she didn't know what it was. It was as if her mind had memorized the language of self-blame and forgot how to speak anything else. And the cruelest part? No one around her could see the cell she lived in. They saw kindness, devotion, strength. But inside she was always apologizing. Apologizing for being sad. Apologizing for taking up space. Apologizing for not being who she thought she should have been by now. That's what guilt does. It convinces you that pain is your penance, that joy is something you have to earn. And for years she believed it. She believed that if she stayed small, if she kept her head down, if she never forgot her mistakes, maybe she could balance the scales. But guilt is a terrible god. It offers no redemption, only repetition, and the longer she worshipped it, the less she remembered what grace felt like. One night, as she sat in the dark, she realized that she wasn't being punished. She was punishing herself. She had built the prison, locked the door, and thrown away the key. And that realization broke something inside her, not in anger but in mercy. Because suddenly she understood, if she built it, she could unbuild it too. That was the night the silence changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting for her to forgive herself enough to walk out into the light. For so long she thought guilt was holy. She wore it like armor, mistaking it for humility. She believed that carrying the pain meant she cared enough. That if she stopped blaming herself, she'd somehow be betraying the lesson. But love never asked her to live like that. Grace never required her to suffer to prove she was sorry. She carried it anyway. Every wrong word, every lost chance, every version of herself that she hated, all of it sat heavy on her shoulders. She'd grown so used to the weight that when peace tried to find her, she flinched. She didn't know how to live without the burden. And sometimes, it's easier to stay broken than to believe you deserve to heal. There were nights she'd pray, not for peace, but for punishment. As if pain could make her pure, as if tears could rewrite the past. And still, God was silent. Not because he was angry, but because he knew she was already punishing herself more than he ever would. She mistook his silence for distance. But it was patience. He was waiting. Waiting for her to drop what was never hers to hold. The weight of other people's choices. The weight of what she couldn't fix. The weight of the version of herself she thought he wanted. One day, she realized she'd been carrying grief that didn't even belong to her. Trying to fix things she never broke. Atoning for things already forgiven. She'd confused surrender with shame and humility with self-destruction. But grace doesn't need martyrs. Grace needs honesty. And honesty sounds like, I can't do this anymore. When she whispered those words, something shifted. The air felt different, lighter. It wasn't a miracle. It was release. The kind that comes not when life changes, but when you stop fighting love. She started to imagine what it would feel like to live unburdened. To laugh without apologizing. To breathe without guilt. to wake up and not rehearse every regret before her feet touched the floor. And for the first time, that didn't sound selfish. It sounded sacred. Because maybe holiness isn't in carrying the world. Maybe it's in trusting the one who already did. And as she thought of that, her shoulders finally relaxed. Her eyes filled, but not from sadness, from awe. Because she could feel it, the weight falling off, piece by piece, until all that was left was her, small, human, forgiven, and free. It didn't happen in a church, or in the middle of a prayer she planned. It happened in the quiet, somewhere between exhaustion and surrender. She had run out of words, run out of ways to prove herself worthy. And in that emptiness, something finally broke open. It wasn't thunder or revelation. It was softer. A stillness that didn't ask her to explain anything. A silence that didn't accuse, didn't demand, didn't measure. And for the first time, she didn't fight it. She just breathed. And when she did, grace slipped in like light through an open window. She used to think forgiveness was something she had to earn. A process, a checklist, a climb. But grace didn't wait for her to be ready. It didn't care how long she'd been angry at herself. It didn't flinch at her shame. It came anyway, steady, patient, holy. And in that moment she understood. God had forgiven her long before she ever asked. It wasn't about saying the right words. It was about stopping long enough to feel them. And when she did, when she let her defenses fall, it was as if the room itself exhaled. The air changed. The guilt that once screamed in her chest finally went quiet. She thought of all the years she'd spent trying to fix herself. The self-help, books, the prayers that sounded more like apologies, the endless lists of what she'd do differently next time. And she laughed, softly, through tears. Because grace doesn't wait for next time. Grace happens now. She remembered the night she told God she didn't deserve to be loved again. And now she realized he had never agreed. He had simply waited. For her to stop talking long enough to hear him whisper, "I never stopped." That realization didn't erase the past. It transformed it. Every regret became a doorway. Every scar, a reminder of mercy's persistence. And she finally understood that maybe forgiveness wasn't something she found. It was someone she had finally let in. She didn't need to perform anymore. She didn't need to prove she was healed. She just had to keep her heart open long enough for love to do what guilt never could. And that's when she realized grace had always been there, waiting at the door, just asking to be let inside. It didn't happen with a loud declaration. There was no music, no grand moment of closure. It was quiet, so quiet she almost missed it. One morning she simply woke up and didn't hate herself anymore. The memories were still there, but they didn't sting the same way. They felt lighter, as if someone had already carried them through the night. Forgiving herself didn't mean pretending it never happened. It meant finally looking at her reflection and seeing more than the mistakes. She saw the woman who survived them. The woman who still got up, still tried, still loved. And for the first time in a long time she smiled, not because everything was fixed, but because she wasn't her own enemy anymore. She used to think forgiving herself would make her careless, that if she let go of the guilt, she might lose the lesson. But grace taught her something different. It showed her that love doesn't erase the truth, it redeems it. That healing doesn't mean she was right, it means she's no longer chained to being wrong. One afternoon, she walked outside and felt the sun on her face. The same sun that had risen every day, even when she didn't feel worthy of its warmth. She closed her eyes, and for the first time she didn't flinch at the light. She let it in, fully, deeply, without apology, and in that moment, she realized forgiveness wasn't something she had done. It was something she had accepted. She whispered softly, "I forgive you." It wasn't dramatic, but it was holy. Because those 3 words broke years of silence between her and her own soul. And that whisper echoed through every part of her that still believed she had to earn her place. It told her the truth she'd forgotten, that even at her worst, she had never fallen out of God's hands. Now, when she remembers the past, she doesn't turn away. She honors it. The version of her that didn't know better, that tried, that learned. Because forgiveness isn't erasing the old self. It's embracing her with mercy. And in doing so, she finally made peace with the only person she had left to forgive. Freedom didn't arrive as fireworks. It came quietly, like sunlight slipping under a closed door, like peace that no longer needed permission to stay. She used to think freedom meant forgetting, starting over, wiping the slate clean. But now she knows. It means remembering without pain, and seeing mercy where there used to be shame. Her mornings changed. She no longer woke up rehearsing regret. She stopped apologizing for being happy. She laughed again, not because everything was perfect, but because she finally stopped asking permission to feel joy. Forgiveness had rewired her heart. She could breathe again, without guilt in every breath. There were still moments when the past whispered, "You don't deserve this." But now she recognized the voice and answered softly, "I already am forgiven." Because she knew the truth now. Grace isn't fragile, and peace doesn't vanish when you remember where you've been. She learned that freedom isn't a place you run to. It's a person you learn to rest in. And in his presence, she was no longer the sum of her mistakes. She was the story of redemption unfolding, one act of mercy at a time. Sometimes she'd still cry, but even her tears felt lighter. They carried gratitude now, not grief. She'd sit by the window, hand over her heart, and whisper, "Thank you for staying." Because that's what grace does. It stays. Through the years, the guilt, the trying, the breaking, it stays. And as she looked at the sky, bathed in quiet morning light, she realized she didn't have to chase freedom anymore. It was already within her. The peace after the storm, the calm after the confession, the beauty of a soul that finally believed it was loved. So if you're still punishing yourself for what's already forgiven, if you still carry a story that ended long ago, let this be your reminder. You don't have to keep paying for what grace already bought. You can stop running, stop proving, stop blaming, because the moment you do, freedom follows, and it doesn't leave.